Everyone, so I'm Robbie, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite films, my top 10 favorite films of the decade 2010 to 2019. Now, it's kind of late, but this list was sort of a long time coming since I've seen so many films from the past few years that it was hard making a top 100, let alone a top 10. And before I start, I just want to say that these 10 picks, these are very personal picks. These are not what I consider to necessarily be the best technically, but those films that stuck with me the most and those which I consider am comfortable with calling my favorites. Now, since this is only a top 10 list, which is roughly ranked, of course, roughly ranked only, uh, I want to share my honorable mentions before heading into the actual list. And these honorable mentions are not in any particular order. So first we have Certified Copy, Computer Chess, The Master from PTA, one of my favorite directors, Midsommar, Nocturama, Norte: The End of History, Phoenix, Salvage, Suspiria, and The Tree of Life. Now, those 10 films, they're great, but they didn't quite make the cut of the top 10. Actually, choosing the 10th pick was hard since these were all like sort of vying for the 10th pick, and the 10th pick would change depending on my mood. But yeah, here are my honorable mentions. So, moving on to the actual list. In 10th place, my 10th favorite film of the decade is It's Such a Beautiful Day, which was directed by Don Hertzfeldt. Now, this film is strange. It's an animated film released in 2012, which is a series of vignettes. So there are a collection of short films from this director who's known for his stickman animated films, which sort of tell philosophical themes in his work. Now, this is about Bill, who suffers from a specific mental illness, but it wasn't exactly described in the film since it's told from his perspective. So we only get to see flashes of how Bill lives throughout his day, and it's up to the viewer to decipher what Bill is suffering. And this film, I just found this film to be very beautiful and a very heartfelt portrayal of mental illness. And I remember being very emotional, especially towards the end. And it has a very great use of music, and it's very self-aware of what it wanted to tell to the audience, especially when it came towards the second half, when it decided to get very philosophical with its themes. Now, I remember when I first watched this when I was younger, when I was like 13 or 14 years old. I remember not very liking it that much because there was a lot I didn't understand, but having rewatched it like 2 or 3 years later with a much more mature mind, this film had a lot to say about life and how we live as human beings, who we interact with, how we respect our family and our friends. And I don't think it should be viewed as a mental illness type of film since it's much more than that. It's a film about life and how we embrace life and it's all its peculiarities and happiness, joys, and sorrows. And it's a very great film. It's only 1 hour. And it's not a lot of your time. It won't take a lot of your time, but I do recommend it, especially if you want something to think about even after the credits roll. So that's my number 10 pick. Okay, my number 9 pick. It's kind of weird since it's a film that's not. How do I say this? It wasn't received well by critics, but me being the black sheep and the contrarian of the film group, it's something that I really love. It's The Neon Demon by Nicholas Winding Refn. Now, how do I describe this film? Now, Refn is known for his very visual style of having uh, very neon colors throughout his work, and he was best known for his film Drive, which starred Ryan Gosling, and also Only God Forgives, which also had Ryan Gosling. And The Neon Demon, which sort of was panned by critics, but which I still love because I felt like it was very bold for a director. And it's very controversial. It's the polarizing film that you would either love or hate because Refn made some very strong and bold decisions throughout this film, especially towards the end. But it's something that I respect since it proves that he's an auteur as a filmmaker. And it's something that really reflects his style both visually and metaphorically. And I remember watching this film and coming out of it being very enthralled, not by just its beauty, but also the story that Refn wanted to tell. Even though the story that he wanted to tell wasn't the most well regarded, I still felt like his direction, his direction and the score by Cliff Martinez, the score which is absolutely beautiful, one of my favorite scores of all time. His score, his direction, and also actually the acting by Elle Fanning and Gina Malone, I felt they sort of combined very well to strengthen Refn's vision. And it's something I really respect for Refn, especially as a director. And it's something that really stuck close with me to my heart even after the film finished. And I could see why people won't like it, especially it doesn't since it doesn't follow the typical narrative structure, and there were some weird choices made throughout. But me being a fan of Refn and his work, I really dug this film. So that's the Neon Demon. That's number 9 on my list. And number 8, we have Climax, which was directed by Gaspar Noé, another controversial director, which I loved. Now, Climax, wait, Gaspar Noé, he is known to be a shock poet of the cinema. He's not afraid to violate certain aspects of basic film standards, and he's not afraid to show extreme sex or extreme violence in his films. He's very unfiltered when it comes to deciding what he wants to show on screen and the themes that he wanted to tell. And Climax, I can't describe this film. It's just something that I love so much. It's about a group of dancers who go to this isolated covered court to practice for sort of a dance competition or something. And after their practice, they decided to have a party. And in that party, they drink a lot of sangria, but little do they know that their sangria is laced with drugs and LSD. And that sort of became the gateway for the film being a hallucinatory acid trip of a nightmare. And oh boy, was this film a nightmare. It was really brilliant. It wasn't entertaining at all, but I'd say it was an experience in itself, and it's something that I'd never forget. It's one of the few films where I distinctly remember the very first time I saw it, and even after multiple viewings, it's still something that amazes me each time. It doesn't get old because there's something very enthralling and bombastic and unpredictable in this film, especially in Gaspar's other films, which were Irreversible and Enter the Void. And I think it's because of Noah's style and direction. Since the way he filmed this film was he didn't follow an exact script. He basically gathered his actors, told them, oh, okay, so here's what you need to do. Here's point A, and I want you to get to point B. And it's up to the actors to decide how to get from one point to the other point. And that made things much more unpredictable, and it made it much more bold and experimental for Gaspar Noé. Even though Climax is his tamest work, and it's certainly not his most experimental, I feel like it would be a good gateway for people who are looking forward or who want to try Gaspar Noé's work, even though he's kind of polarizing and controversial. And I just remember watching the very first scene for the first time, the dance scene with Supernature. That really stuck with me. And it's something that I distinctly remember and I distinctly rewatch and go back to every time I think about this film. And yeah, that's Climax from one of the masters of French cinema. Okay, so moving on, I'm taking so much time talking about these films, but it's alright. Number seven, we have A Separation by Asghar Farhadi. Now, this is actually a strange pick since it's a film that I only saw once. I first saw it when I was 15 years old. And it's not a film I would talk a lot about to my film friends. It's not something that I would normally mention as one of the films I love. But I really, really love this film. And it would be vague for me to describe the film since the last time I saw it was about 5 years ago. But it's really, really one of the best portrayals of marriage and divorce, especially in the country of Iran. And it's very emotional and heartfelt. And it's one of the films where, even though I love, it's something that I don't want to rewatch for some reason because I felt like the first experience of watching it was very brutal and dramatic, and I felt like that would be enough to sort of satisfy my viewing experience, even though, of course, I'd still want to view it again. But it's one of the films that really stuck with me the most, especially since this is one of the first few films that I watched when I first started to explore foreign cinema and cinema outside, English and Filipino films. And yeah, A Separation, it has a lot of themes about love and romance and marriage, and it really, really stuck with me. And I highly recommend it, especially if you're looking forward to foreign cinema, since I believe it's very accessible compared to a lot of more experimental and non-accessible work. So, number six on my list, it's a recent film. It is Portrait of a Lady on Fire, directed by Celine Sciamma. Obviously, my favorite film of 2019. It obviously had to make the list. Now, just like Climax, it was one of the films where the first time I saw it was one of the most unforgettable memories I had. I first saw it during the film festival last year, and I have to say that was the best cinematic experience I think I had during the last year. And why do I love this film? It's difficult to explain. It's very tender and it's very emotional and it's very subtle, which is my style, especially when it comes to dramatic romances like this. It's not the type of film where characters would cry in every scene and profess that I say I love you to each other. No, it's more subtle in its work. And Celine Sciamma has such a bold and distinct vision for this film. And everything is actually perfect, from the cinematography to the acting from Adele Haenel and Nomi Merlant. And the score for this film, even though it wasn't overbearing, even though it wasn't used in every scene, it still made a huge impact on me since the way it was handled with was dealt with so well in the campfire, especially the way it used Vivaldi's Summer Storm. It was absolutely magnificent, and it's certainly one of the best romances I've seen in film actually, and it's something that I'll never forget. And it's also something that has a criterion, and it has something with a great poster, and that criterion poster is brilliant. I'm ordering that when it comes out in June. Now moving on. Okay, we're down to the top five. Fifth place, we have Personal Shopper, which was directed by Olivier Assayas. Now, this is a very interesting pick, since when I first saw this film when I was very young, I hated it, I loathed it. And I feel like that was primarily because I didn't understand anything at all. But having rewatched it multiple times over the few years, it's something that, again, just like the other films, it's something that really stuck with me. And it's a film with a very, very brilliant hold on loneliness and sort of the way we remember the people we love and the people who have come before us. And it's uh, something that I keep close to my heart since it's something that I relate to a lot. And I really remember why I didn't like it the first time, primarily because I found it very slow and there wasn't a lot happening. And even though the way it was promoted was as a horror story, a horror genre film, but it really isn't a horror film, even though it uses the idea of ghosts and mediums. It really isn't a horror film. I feel like it's a great psychological drama, character exploration on this woman who tries to connect with her dead brother. And this woman who is played by Kristen Stewart, absolutely brilliant performance. A lot of people tend to criticize Kristen Stewart and her acting, but I really feel like she's a great actress and her acting really shines here, especially the more nuanced, subtle acting along the lines of, say, Casey Affleck from Manchester by the Sea. I think she does a brilliant job in portraying the psychodrama and psychosexual fragility of the human psyche. And it's something that I really liked watching throughout. And it's something that even after the credits ended, it's the type of film I search online and look for film analysis for because it's something that I just really love, and it's something that I really enjoyed watching. And Olivia Assayas, actually a director I'm not super familiar with. I've only seen Irma Vep and Clouds of Sils Maria aside from Personal Shopper, and he's certainly a director I want, certainly one of the few French directors I want to try out more in the future since he has a very, very interesting style and direction. Now, that's fifth place, Personal Shopper. Fourth place, we have Uncle Bumi, who can recall his past lives, directed by Joe, or let me try to pronounce his name, Apichatpong Wira Sethakul. Now, yeah, he's a Thai director. He's one of no. He's known as one of the greatest modern directors of our times, and I can definitely see why. Uncle Bunmi is a masterpiece. I'm not gonna pretend that I understand what happened throughout the entire film, but as a commentary on Thai culture and how we honor the dead, interspersed with the mythologies and superstitions of Thai culture, I believe that Uncle Bunmi does it very, very well, combined with sort of the mystic, surrealist, magical realist perspective, sort of along the lines of Murakami, but it's not exactly Murakami, but in terms of the magical realism, it certainly is there. Uncle Bunmi is a masterpiece in and out of itself. Now, I feel like I'm doing this film a disjustice since I've only seen it once, but I will definitely see it again. But it's just something that really stuck with me, and it's something that I think out of the 10 films in this list, this is the only film that I've sort of read a lot about after. Like after the credits rolled, I was searching on YouTube like film analysis and reading Reddit threads and reading sort of ending explained videos because I was really, really, really interested and drawn into how we're ethical. I'm sorry, how Joe depicted how Joe depicted Thai culture in this piece, and yeah, it's definitely something that I recommend, but it's definitely a very slow film, so you have to be open about it, and it's not something that you would understand in a single go since it doesn't follow conventional film standards and it doesn't follow a certain narrative three-act structure. But yeah, in terms of favorite films, I feel like Uncle Boonmi is something that I would return to and rewatch more than a lot of other films in my top 100 list. That's why I placed it this high, even though I'm admitting that I didn't really understand a lot of it. And I feel like I'm still barely scratching the surface on my basic understanding on what Joe wanted to portray in this work. And yeah, this is a director I really want to explore more in the future. Okay, now we're down to the top three. And ranking these was very difficult, and yeah, they're roughly ranked, so they sort of switch depending on my mood. But as of me at this moment, here is the ranking. Third place, we have Raw, which was directed by Julie Ducournau. Now, again, this is a French film. I love French films. This is a French film about a vegetarian girl who goes into a college school as a college freshman and discovers that she has a sudden craving for meat after all of her life being a vegetarian. And her craving for meat, which started as, normal meat, the meat we eat from beef and chicken, the craving sort of turned to human flesh. And that's where the film takes off. Now, here's the thing, this film is being panned as a horror film. And even the way it was, advertised when it first went out in Cannes, like, oh, people are walking out, people are vomiting, people are fainting while watching this film. And people are saying it's the scariest film ever made, but I really, really don't think it's a horror film, and I really, really don't see Ducournau thinking it as a horror film, even though she moved into the more grotesque parts. I really think this is a coming of age film about a teenager coming to terms with adjusting with her life, coming to terms with her friends, coming to terms with her sexuality, and basically every aspect. And it's a film about change. And it's one of the few films about change that I have seen which was portrayed in a very deranged and grotesque manner. And I feel like this manner of depicting the film made the experience even more exciting in a way because again, just like the other directors in this list, the Cornell's vision is very bold. She definitely wanted to know where this film was going, and paired with great acting from Gareth Marillier and a brilliant, a wonderful, wonderful synth score. This really is one of the best films for me for the decade. It really changed. I know how cliche this is, but it really changed my life and it really changed the way I saw films, especially how we want to portray our themes and how it doesn't necessarily have to be in sort of the normal mundane manner of depicting things. And yeah, I think out of all the films of the decade, this is the coming of age film that stuck with me the most because I felt like even though it dealt with a lot of body horror and body gore, it had a very black heart and it really had something to say. And the message that it wanted to say was very heartwarming and it was very tender. And it's something that I highly respect the Corno for. And she's definitely a director I'm looking forward to in terms of future releases. And yeah, it's something that I really love, and that's number three, Raw. Now, in second place, okay. Second place, I love this film. It is The Favorite, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. And The Favorite is one of my favorite films. Actually, between 1 and 2, 1 and 2 was super hard to decide because 1 and 2 would switch every day. That's why it took me so long to make this list. But I eventually settled with The Favorite for number 2. So Yorgos Lanthimos, one of my favorite directors, definitely one of my top 3 favorite directors, if not my favorite director. He has a certain distinct style of filmmaking wherein he tends to do this sort of sci-fi dystopia, not exactly sci-fi, but he has a knack for having characters speak in monotone syllables, and that definitely propelled his style as a filmmaker, and it definitely propelled him as an author filmmaker, especially coming out from his masterpiece Dogtooth and The Lobster and The Killing of a Sacred Deer. He really, really knows how to tell his themes, and he really knows the story that he wants to tell. And same with The Favorite, which is his historical film, and which is actually seen as a departure from his other films, since it didn't employ that exact monotone, syllabic pronunciation of the characters. I still think it's amazing, since it's a very, very good portrayal of the emptiness of love. And it's not a romance film, it's a historical drama, but the way this film projected Queen Anne's loneliness into the way she sees her love life and the way it sort of affects the matters in the British court I felt like it was handled very well. And this film had strong performances from Olivia Colman, Emma Stone, and Rachel Weisz. And the way the Yorgos uses classical music to heighten his themes, along with the script, which is brilliant, and the cinematography, I really, really loved The Favorite. And it's sort of a personal favorite of mine. And it's a film that I've seen almost, I think, 10 times or 11 times throughout my lifetime when I first saw it. And it's something that I'll definitely be rewatching for the years to come. And number one, we have Phantom Thread, which was directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Now, earlier, while I was mentioning the honorable mentions list, I mentioned The Master, which is also directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, PTA. And that was actually the film out of all the films in the honorable mentions list, which almost made it to the 10th pick. I was deciding between that and Such a Beautiful Day, and you can tell how much I love PTA. And I love Phantom Thread. It's a film that I recommended to a lot of my friends, and they didn't like Phantom Thread because, and I could see why, because it's a very mundane story about a dressmaker who falls in love. That's 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 the basic premise of the story. It's a dressmaker who falls in love with this waitress girl, and the film sort of explores their relationship as they grow older. And I really, really love this film because I feel like since the dressmaker who was, depicted by Daniel Day-Lewis was brilliant in the film, the way he depicted the artist so dedicated to his work while at the same time falling in love was brilliant and tender, and it was something that made me so emotional. Actually, Daniel Day-Lewis, his character in the film was a character that I related to a lot. And that is a big reason of why this ended up number one in the list. Aside from, of course, PTA's brilliant direction and the score, which is actually my favorite score of all time from Radiohead's Johnny Greenwood. I think the main reason why I chose it as my favorite film because it's the film that I find most personal to my heart. It's the film that I'd first think of, more specifically the character, when people ask who do you relate to, who protagonist do you relate to in film, because the way he struggles with relationships and the way he struggles with perfectionism and being a master at his art is something that I hold close to me, and it's something that I find very affecting. And even though this film is basically a love story, I really, really think it's more than that. And I really think it's how we view life and how we sort of go about our day, living our daily works and our daily struggles, and sort of how we balance romantic relationships into all of that. And it basically, at the end, makes you question sort of the means we get to achieve not just our relationships, but our worth ethic. And it makes you question whether makes you question really the boundaries that we're willing to push through in order to just become a perfectionist or a master at something, or a master at relationships, or a master at our work. And yeah, it's something I love. And I know I just love this film. It's really hard to explain in a single setting, but yeah, that's my favorite film of the decade. And yeah, there's a chance that The Favorite might go back to number one. But as of the moment, this is definitely my number one. Mainly because of how much I related to the character. And mainly because I love PTA's films so much. So, yeah, those are my favorite films. My top 10 films of the decade. Sorry that took so long. That was 30 minutes. But yeah, thank you for watching.